Women plus real estate. Real estate insight for decisive, intelligent women who learn, rent, own, invest, and live with intention. Here's what's happening this week. When you write that check for your rent or your mortgage, on the first of the month,
What do you think you're actually buying?
Well, most people would say they're buying a roof over their heads.
Yeah.
Maybe 1,000 square feet, a parking spot,
Yeah.
a good commute, hopefully.
hopefully a commute that doesn't make you want to scream. Yeah.
Right. It's a transaction. It's for shelter. But what if I told you that you aren't just buying walls and a roof? What if you are actually purchasing a statistical probability for your children's entire lives?
Okay, that is a provocative question to start with, and it's the absolute heart of what we are getting into today. We are looking at a deep dive based on something called the Opportunity Atlas and the work of economist Raj Chetty, all framed through this really powerful story about a woman named Maya.
It really is. And I want to be clear right off the bat, this is not just a story about real estate.
This is a story about something called future math.
Future math. I like that.
It's about how moving, say, just 4 miles down the road can translate into over $1 million in lost lifetime earnings. Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how geography really does shape destiny. Look at these invisible price tags that are attached to all of our zip codes and ask if the American dream is actually just a real estate transaction. Okay, so let's set the scene properly. It's late, it's 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and we're in the kitchen of a single mother named Maya. It's quiet. Her 2 daughters, Zara, who's 8, and Amara, who's 5, they're asleep in the next room. And Maya is sitting there with a calculator, just completely stressed out. She has a Section 8 housing voucher, and she's just gotten a notice about a rent increase. Right, so she's crunching the numbers, her landlord wants to bump the rent up, and she's trying to figure out, can I stay or do I have to move? But she isn't doing the usual budget math, is she? This isn't just about the price of milk and electricity. No, not at all. She's looking at a website called the Opportunity Atlas, and this is where that future math really comes in. So, okay, before we get to Maya's specific numbers, we have to explain what this tool actually is, because Opportunity Atlas sounds a little bit like a, corporate buzzword. It does, but this isn't some small survey or a poll. We're talking big data in the truest sense of the word. It's built on data from virtually the entire U.S. population. We're talking about 20 million Americans who were born between 1978 and 1983. Yeah, and they know exactly how much money that kid ended up making. Exactly. Wow, that's like a time machine for policy. You can see the result of a childhood, before it even happens for the next kid. That's a great way to put it, and that is why Maya's discovery that night was so jarring. When she typed in those 2 addresses, she wasn't looking at a Zillow estimate. She was looking at historical fact. Okay, so let's get into what she saw. What was the comparison she was making? So her current apartment, the rent is $1,275. It's a stretch for her budget. I see, but she found a cheaper alternative, maybe 4 miles away, and the rent there is only $950. Okay, so that's a saving of $325
a month for a single mom. That's massive. That's almost $4,000 a year.
It's huge. That's groceries, that's an emergency fund. I mean, the logical financial brain is just going to be move, save the cash.
Yeah, of course. And if you were just looking at a normal rental site, you'd move in a heartbeat.
But she looked at the atlas, and in her current more expensive neighborhood, kids who grew up there went on to have an average household income of $44,000 as adults.
Okay, and the cheaper place, the one that's 4 miles away?
In that neighborhood, the average drops to $28,000.
Whoa, that is a massive gap. You move 4 miles and the expected income for your kids drops by nearly 40%? It's a difference of $16,000 a year per child. Okay, hold on. I want to really let that number sink in. $16,000. It might not sound like a fortune in a single year, but careers are long. Right, let's do the math on that. If you project that over a, standard 40-year career, you're at $640,000 in lost lifetime earnings for just one child.
For one of her children, and she has 2 daughters.
And she has 2, so for Zara and Amara, you combine that, you're talking about $1.28 million.
$1.28 million. Moving to that cheaper apartment to save a few hundred on rent now would statistically cost her daughters over $1 million in the future.
That is just, it's mind-blowing. She was looking at saving, what, $3,900 a year in rent, but the invisible cost, the hidden price tag, was over $1 million taken directly out of her kids' future pockets.
And this is what's so fascinating. It wasn't just about money. The Atlas tracks other metrics too. Maya saw that in her current, more expensive neighborhood, the incarceration rate for boys was about 4.2%. In the cheaper neighborhood, like what? Let me guess, it went up. It jumped to 8.7%.
So you're doubling the risk of your son going to prison just by moving 4 miles.
Exactly. College attendance rates, they dropped from 38% to 22%. And maybe the most telling stat of all was about the cycle of poverty itself.
What did it say?
Children from that cheaper neighborhood were 81% likely to remain in low-income neighborhoods as adults. So by staying put, she wasn't just paying rent, she was buying her daughters a statistical chance to get out of the system. She was literally negotiating between generational wealth and generational poverty.
I have to play devil's advocate for a second here, though, because when I hear neighborhoods determine destiny, I get a little skeptical. Couldn't you just argue that,
High-income families just happen to live in high-income neighborhoods?
Go for it. Sure, the classic correlation versus causation question.
Right. Maybe the kids do well because their parents are doctors or lawyers, not because the zip code has some kind of magic soil. Maybe it's about the families, not the streets.
And that is the classic selection bias argument. And honestly, for a long, long time, most sociologists thought you were right. They thought the neighborhood was just a backdrop, not an active cause.
So how did they finally prove us skeptics wrong?
Because you can't just, randomly assign families to neighborhoods. That seems impossible.
Well, you can't usually. They had to find a situation where families didn't choose their neighborhood. They needed something random.
Which in the real world almost never happens. You live where you can afford to live.
Almost never, yes. Back in 1994, the federal government accidentally created the perfect lab conditions. It was a program called Moving to Opportunity.
Okay, I do love a good social experiment. How did this work?
So the government took about 4,600 families living in public housing. Think Chicago, New York, LA, and these were families very similar to Maya's. Single moms, low income, really struggling.
And they just gave them vouchers to move. They did, but with a massive catch. One group got standard vouchers they could use anywhere, but the experimental group, they were forced to move to low-poverty neighborhoods. What does that mean, a low poverty? Areas where less than 10% of the residents were poor, so they essentially mandated that these families move to, quote-unquote, better areas. They took the choice element out of it. They took the choice out of it to see what the environment itself would do, and then researchers tracked them for decades. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When they first looked at the data years later, the results were kind of disappointing. Really? After all that? For the adults, the moms who moved, they had better mental health, they felt safer, but their incomes didn't really change much. They didn't suddenly get rich. So it seemed like the experiment failed. The neighborhood didn't matter. That was the consensus for a while. It looked like it didn't generate wealth. But there's a big but coming, I can feel it. There's a massive but. Years later, Raj Chetty and his team at Harvard decided to reanalyze the data, but they didn't look at the parents. He looked at the children. Yeah, they looked at the children, and what they found changed everything. They found that the age of the child at the moment of the move was the single biggest predictor of their future success. The age. They found a critical threshold, age 13. Why 13? Is that just, puberty or something? Well, think of a neighborhood like a language. If you move to France when you're 7, you're going to speak perfect, unaccented French. You just absorb the culture, the norms. But if you move when you're 16, you'll always have an accent. You're already kind of formed. Chetty found the same exact thing with economic mobility. Every single year a child spends in a better environment adds to their future earnings. It's like a dosage effect. So a kid who moves at age 2 gets a huge dose. A kid who moves at 12 gets a smaller dose. Correct, but after age 13, the window basically seals shut.
the positive effects drop off significantly. The environment just can't rewire their trajectory in the same way. That is unbelievably powerful. It means geography acts like a kind of gravity. It pulls you in a direction, and the longer you're exposed to it as a kid, the stronger that pull becomes. And for those kids who moved early, they earned on average $302,000 more over their lifetimes compared to the kids who stayed in public housing.
300 grand more?
Plus, they were significantly less likely to become single parents themselves, and less likely to go to prison.
So, okay, let's connect this back to Maya. She sees this data, she knows the math. She decides, okay, I'm going to find an apartment in a high opportunity place. She finds a listing, she calls the landlord. What's the first thing that happens? Well, the first thing they ask is, what's your income? How are you planning to pay? And she says, I have a Section 8 voucher. What do you think happens? The phone hangs up? Usually, yeah. We don't accept Section 8. Is that even legal?
Many places, yes, it is perfectly legal to discriminate based on source of income. And even where it isn't, landlords have a million tactics. They'll just say the unit was suddenly rented 5 minutes ago. Okay, but let's say she gets past that phone call. She actually gets a viewing. Now she has to get there. Maya doesn't have a car. The high opportunity neighborhoods are usually in the suburbs, right? Far from the city center and the good bus lines.
So now she's trying to navigate a suburban bus system with a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old.
It's a 3-hour round trip just to look at her front door. And if she likes it, then comes what some people call a party tax, the application fees. Oh, they're huge. An application fee might be $50 or $75 per adult. And if you have to apply to 10 different places just to get one, yes, that's hundreds of dollars. You're burning through your grocery budget just for the privilege of being told no. Exactly. And then there's the information gap. Maya's caseworker told her the rent limit was $1,200 a month. She didn't hand her a map and say, hey, by the way, if you could find a place in this zip code, your kids will make 30% more money. The system is designed to get people housed, period. Not to optimize their economic mobility. It's about finding housing, not future wealth. And finally, there's the urgency trap. These vouchers have an expiration date, usually 60 to 120 days. So the clock is ticking from the second you get it. It is. And if you don't find a place in time, you lose the voucher completely. So desperation sets in. You end up just taking the very first landlord who says yes, regardless of the neighborhood stats. It sounds like the whole system is almost designed to keep people in the same kinds of zip codes. But wait, the source material mentioned a solution, right? There's a model in Seattle that actually worked. Yes, the Seattle and King County Housing Authority partnership. This is a great example of actually applying the science. They realized that just handing someone a piece of paper, a voucher, wasn't enough. So what did they do differently? They removed every single barrier we just talked about. They provided what they called housing concierges. So like a real estate agent for voucher holders. Basically, yeah, people who actually helped with the search, who negotiated with landlords, who just smoothed out the process. And they offered financial help to cover those application fees and security deposits. What about the landlords who just hang up the phone? They actively recruited landlords in high opportunity areas. They treated them like partners, not like an obstacle.
And what was the result?
A massive increase in the number of families moving to these better neighborhoods. It was definitive proof that low-income families do want these neighborhoods, and they will move if you just take away the structural roadblocks. It really shifts the blame, doesn't it? It stops being about so-called bad choices by the poor and starts being about the bad systems that we've built. Exactly. The desire is there, the bridge is just broken. So let's bring this all the way back to Maya. We left her at her kitchen table. She has all this information. She knows the stakes are $1.28 million. Right, but she still has to deal with her current landlord who wants to raise her rent to $1,500, which she absolutely cannot afford. This is the climax of her story. She goes into that negotiation. Now, remember, everyone around her, her caseworker, her friends, they all think she's just haggling over $225 a month. They think it's a standard budget problem, but Maya knew the real stakes. She wasn't just negotiating a lease, she was negotiating for Zara's 38% chance of going to college. She was negotiating for Amara to avoid a doubled incarceration risk. She was fighting to break the cycle so that her grandkids wouldn't need vouchers one day. So how did she do it? She used this framework called PREP: position, research, exchange, propose. She didn't just go in and plead. She showed the landlord the data on fair market rent for that area, proving his ask was actually too high. So she used research. And she highlighted her value as a stable tenant who always pays on time. And it worked. She got him to keep the rent at $12.75. That is incredible, and I love the mindset shift there. She wasn't a tenant begging for a favor, she was a mother protecting a $1.28 million asset. And that asset was her children's future. So let's zoom out. What does this all mean for the rest of us? I mean, obviously there are huge policy implications here. Huge. For one, it tells us that housing vouchers are expensive, sure, but generational poverty, that is way more expensive. Housing authorities should be providing this Opportunity Atlas data to every single person who gets a voucher.
And for any landlords who might be listening.
I think it's a moral call to action. Refusing Section 8 in a good neighborhood isn't just a business decision to avoid some paperwork. It is actively denying a child a statistical shot at a different life. You are the gatekeeper to that $300,000 lifetime earning bump. But here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Even if you don't have a voucher, even if you own your own home, this data still applies to everyone, doesn't it? It absolutely does. The zip code effect doesn't discriminate. Whether you're rich or poor, where you live exerts this constant, quiet pressure on your life and on your children's lives. So we should all be checking our own addresses. I would really encourage it. Go to the Opportunity Atlas website, look up where you grew up, look up where you live now. It can be a little disturbing, can't it? Because we love to tell ourselves that talent rises to the top, that if you just work hard, you'll make it.
Yeah, the myth of the meritocracy.
Right, but what this data suggests is that talent is actually everywhere, but opportunity is hoarded in very specific zip codes. It suggests the American dream isn't a ladder you climb, it's more like a membership you buy. And usually you buy it with your mortgage or your rent check, which brings us right back to Maya. She didn't just buy an apartment, she bought a probability. And that is the takeaway for everyone listening. Whether you have a voucher or jumbo mortgage, go check your address, because whether we admit it or not, your zip code is the silent co-author of your life story.
A silent co-author with a very heavy pen. So what happened with Maya?
Well, the good news is she is still in that apartment. Zara and Amara are in the same school and they're thriving. And Maya is now teaching other families in her community how to use the Opportunity Atlas. She's paying it forward. She proved that while geography is this incredibly powerful force, everything is negotiable, maybe even destiny, if you have the right information. So here's your homework. Go to opportunityatlas.org. Type in the address where you grew up, see if you beat the odds, or if maybe the odds helped shape you. It is definitely worth a look. That's this week from Women Plus Real Estate. Full newsletter with data, links, and archives at womenplusre.substack.com. Until next week, keep your eyes on the market.